they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Abram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. So, when God calls Abram, he gives him a simple command. What's the command? Okay, he tells him to go. And in going, what is he leaving behind? Right, everything he's known. I'm sorry? So, that's an interesting question there. So, does his father die before or after he leaves? So, what's interesting about it is when we look at in the New Testament, in Acts 7, when Stephen gives his defense, he talks about this same thing, about when Abram leaves to go to the land of Canaan. And what he says about it, if we look at verses 3 and 4 of Acts 7, so here he says, "And he said to him, 'Leave your country and your relatives and come into the land that I will show you.' Then he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. From there, after his father died, God had him move to this country in which you are now living." So, the understanding that Stephen has, and we are told Stephen has the Spirit when he's speaking, well, he says that the order in these events was that when they're called, they leave together and go to Haran with his father. His father dies there, and then he is called to leave and go on to the place God would show him. So in essence, there's the reality is that he was called, he was told, leave your land, leave your family, leave your father's household. And he gets as far as Haran before he stays there for a time, and his father dies, and then God says, okay, it's time to keep going, would be what it seems happens. But when you're reading in Genesis, it sounds like God calls him, and he just immediately goes on and goes to Canaan directly. Robert.
And Haran is the name of his brother.
So in English, the spelling is the same, but in Hebrew, the name of the city is spelled different from the name of his brother. So the city that they go to is not the same spelling, but it looks like it in the English transliteration, yes. So when he calls him to go out, what he's in essence asking him to do is to abandon everything, like David said, everything he knows, and this includes all of his relatives except for Lot, who it seems has kind of become like a ward of his after his brother had died, and then his wife, and then whoever else was in their household, so any servants that they might have had. And to go to somewhere. See, God doesn't tell him, oh, you're going to go to the land of Canaan. He just says, you're going to go to where I show you. And so from the time he leaves Ur, and then later from Haran, he doesn't know where he's going until he gets to the place and God appears to him. Because when we're looking at chapter 12, and he is in the land, and he reaches Shechem, which is on the northern part, northern central Israel, as it would become later, but at that time is the land of Canaan. That's where God appears to him at the oaks of Moreh, and he tells him, this is where your descendants will inherit. This is the land they're going to have. So the land promise doesn't come initially with the first promises, but it is part of those promises. So this goes back to verses 2 and 3, the things that God promises him that he will do for him. There's 5 things, and each of them God says, I will do something. So what are the things God will do if Abram will obey? He'll make him a great nation, which is important because what do we know already about Abram and his wife from the end of the 11th chapter? She's barren and they have no children. So this is the only hope for Abram to have children at this point, is to trust the Lord. What's another one of the things God says he will do for them? Okay, he'll bless them. So when he blesses them, what does that look like? Okay, so he's going to bless them with a son. And he's going to make them wealthy. That's one of the other things we'll see as we go through the life of Abraham, is that he gains more and more when it comes to wealth and flocks and servants as he goes along. And it's all the blessings of God. So even though he goes to this land that God will show him, and he spends 25 years waiting for that promised child to be born that would later lead to this great nation that would inherit this land that he's living in as a sojourner, the whole time, God is showing him through the blessings that he gives that he keeps his promises. And one of the other things about that is that it's not just Abram who will be blessed, but he will use Abram to bless others. So if you look at the end of verse 2, he says, I'll make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. So as Abraham increases because of the blessings of God, God's going to use him to bless others as well. So one example of that, as we'll see when we get into chapter 13 tonight, is God is going to bless Lot as well for being connected to him. And he'll bless later Hagar and Ishmael because they're connected to him. And then on through the descendants that come from this family. So one of the things that this looks like also, what about his relationship with the people around him in the land of Canaan? Because we know that the land's full of people when he gets there. So what about them?
They're going to be blessed when they bless him.
Right, so he says, I will bless those who bless you. And then what's he going to do to the people who don't bless him?
Curse them.
He's going to curse them. And the way the Hebrew is worded there, the idea is that he will bless in the sense of letting them share in the promises or in at least the blessings of the promises God gives to Abraham. But the idea of cursing them is the idea of shutting them out from it. So they won't get to be a part of the blessings is the idea. And so in those things, what we're going to see is that the people who do good towards Abram, they're blessed by God, but those who do evil to him end up suffering and are punished. And we'll see that in just a little bit in the 12th chapter. So in all of this, the final thing God promises that in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So this is the first part of what will later be called the promise of the offspring or of the seed, the promise of the one that would bless all families and nations of the earth through him, a descendant that would come to be that blessing. So in the garden, it started with the curse on the serpent that through the offspring of the woman would come this one that would defeat the serpent, crush its head. Now God narrows it down even more through this one family, through Abram. He would have that offspring now come. And so God is slowly narrowing it down to show us who it is that's going to be the one to crush the head of the serpent. So, last thing I want to ask you about, when he's in the land, what are the 2 things Abram builds in the land? Altars. So he builds one altar in the northern central part, and then one in the southern part near Bethel and Ai. And why does he do that in the land? Okay, so on the one hand, this is showing kind of the full extent of the land. He's gone from the north to the south of the whole land. And what does he do at each of these places? He calls on the name of the Lord. And another way of thinking of that is praying and worshiping God there. But the reason he's doing that is that God has appeared to him in the land. So the first time he builds the altar, you look at verse 7 of chapter 12, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So that tells us that God shows himself to Abram when he gets to the land. This is how Abram knows, oh, this is where I've been going to this whole time. And this isn't the only time God is going to appear to Abram. When is another time he will appear to him? Before Sodom and Gomorrah happens, in chapter 18, 3 men are coming by where Abram lives, and he invites them in. And who are those 3 men? Well, one is the Lord and 2 angels with him. And they're there, those angels, to go on and examine and then judge the people in Sodom for the Lord. And so God appears a number of times to Abram. And so some people will say, well, does that mean it was like just a vision, or was it Jesus, or what? And I don't know any more than you do, because all we know is that the Lord appeared to him. And the reason that that's important is up to this point, Abram has just taken the word of the Lord as true. And now he's been shown through the Lord's appearance, this is the place. And so he worships God there. And then he travels further through the land. And once he's seen the good land that God has promised to him, he builds another altar and he worships the Lord there as well, before continuing into what is called the Negev. And this is the southern region of what would later become Judea, in the wilderness area to the west of the Dead Sea. And the reason that that's important is that it's a dry and arid region. And so when there wasn't good rainfall, you didn't have many rivers to rely on in the land of Canaan then, or today even. And so famine, especially in the ancient times, was very common if there wasn't good rainfall, because unless you were right near the Jordan, you didn't have access to that water necessarily. And that's what happens to the land once Abram has reached it. We're told in verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. It came about when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, see now I know that you are a beautiful woman, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you. It came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore, he treated Abram well for her sake and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So, what is the first thing Abram does wrong here? He goes to Egypt. Because what should he have done when there's famine in the land? Right, he should have asked the Lord for help or for instruction, but rather he just simply goes on down to Egypt. He goes there because Egypt was kind of the breadbasket of the ancient world in that region because of the regular flooding of the Nile. And so when there were droughts and famines in other places, typically there wasn't in Egypt, though that doesn't mean that it never happened, as we'll see later in the book of Genesis. But the second thing he does wrong is, what does he tell his wife to do? Lie. But is it really a lie? You know, you kind of imagine that's probably what he said. We're just bending the truth. You are my half-sister, after all.
There was an intent to deceive.
Right, there's intention behind this. So why is Abram thinking we need to hide our relationship? What's he expecting to happen? Right, he's afraid for himself. And again, there is a way that from human reasoning, you could kind of understand it. He's been made all these promises, but now, that land, there's this famine, and so we need to go somewhere else, and that's dangerous, and, you're really pretty. And, we always think that's a compliment sometimes when we're using it in a way that's not very complimentary, right? You're just so pretty. I'm just so worried what people will do to me because of you. It's really a compliment. Well, the deception ends up being the very thing that causes what he was worried about. So because he lies about his relationship with his wife, the Egyptian officials, once they meet Abram, because he's already got a large complement of animals and servants with him, he's coming into this foreign land, and he would have had to have permission from Pharaoh to do that and from his officials. And they take one look at Sarai, and even though she's 65, she was obviously a looker, because this is going to happen more than once in her life as she gets older. But she's so beautiful, that's all the servants could talk about to Pharaoh. This woman that is with this Abram guy, she's so beautiful, we should take her because it's just his sister. And in that time, that was how you made alliances. Is you would take a woman from the clans around you or the nations around you, and then you were married, and so you would help each other. And so from the human perspective, they're just doing business. It's just politics as usual for the Egyptians. And you kind of imagine what it would have felt like for Abram. Your wife gets taken from you. They think that they can do that it's okay because she's your sister is what you've told them. And then you just start getting sheep and oxen and servants and donkeys. Do you think Abram was happy getting stuff in that situation? I think he was probably regretting it quite severely, praying and maybe hoping things might work out. But God's the one who intervenes. So he proves that thing that he had told Abraham, that if someone curses you, I will curse them. Well, that's immediately what happens with Pharaoh's house. God strikes him with a plague, and it's because of Sarah. And clearly he communicated in some way to the Pharaoh that was what was going on and why it was happening. Because we're told Pharaoh comes to Abram and he already knows the whole story. Maybe he got it from Sarai. Maybe she's the one who told him this is why this is happening. Maybe God sent him word, like he does later with Abimelech. But here, he comes and he asks him, why'd you do this to me? Robert?
Well, and this might be the next thing we're getting to, but it's interesting because there's a curse and also a blessing. I mean, if you think about it, he lied, and it all turned out okay for him.
Right.
He got his wife back, and he got all this stuff, and then he got sent on his way.
And so that phrasing, it all turned out okay for him. Does it?
Going with everything. I mean,
Right.
all that. So he got his wife. He was given all this stuff because his wife was taken, and now he got his wife back, and he still has all this stuff.
Right. But
Thinking, another thing we talked about, considering Abraham, I consider Sarah too. I mean, imagine what she's going through. I mean, I can't, you're just completely at the will of these men, and it's because your husband's faith isn't like, he should have sought the Lord even then.
right.
So he was doing what we do, kind of lead our lives, and we're not really thinking first, I need to consult the Lord on this. And then other people, our family, suffer for those decisions.
So I think that's an important part of this is, Sarah, through this whole thing, she's following the instructions of her husband, and it's putting her in an uncomfortable, potentially sinful situation, but it's the Lord who rescues them from this, not because he approves of any of what's been going on, because God wants to stop it before it goes any further. Because one of the things that Pharaoh makes the comment of is when he's giving Sarai back to him, he says, why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her for my wife? So it seems that this happens before anything could have happened that would have created worse sin between Sarai and Abram and Pharaoh that would have caused even worse punishment to follow it. And that the outcome of this, while, yes, Abram, he's been enriched because he was given all of these gifts, it's not because he did what was right. And even the other fruit that is born from this, if we just look ahead at chapter 16 for just a moment, in verse 1, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no child, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So the whole adventure that comes later, misadventure, with Hagar and Ishmael being born and all of that, is also connected back to this event.
Something interesting about Sarah that kind of tickles my imagination, that she probably didn't have that much faith in God as Abraham did before this happened. Because even when she's told that she's going to have a child, she left like, oh yeah. So, like, there's this little, what do you call it, hesitation to tell Abraham, what you're asking me to do is going to go against God's will. And my mind is like, well, is he really helping us?
Right, and that's one of the things that we really see in this, is that even from the beginning, Abraham's faith didn't mean that he never was weak in his actions, that he was never tempted to do things and thinking that he was helping fulfill God's promises or protect his promises, that ended up putting him in sinful or compromised positions. And so this is one of the ways in which God would have been demonstrating both to Abram and to Sarai, if you trust me, I will take care of these things. Because they see his power in what he does to Pharaoh's house. And then also you think about this for the generation who comes out of Egypt and then later who goes into the land. When they're reading and thinking about these things, what are they going to connect the idea of Pharaoh and plagues to? Well, this is kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen later in the Exodus.
So if you look maybe in contrast towards Abraham and Saul, because Saul took it on his own to do what he did, not as innocent as Abraham.
Right. So a lot of the time, the problems that we find, not just like when we're reading the stories in Scripture, but even in our own struggles with sin, is when we think we've got it figured out, or we know the better way to handle a situation, but we haven't even stopped to seek God's will on it, or we know what his will is, and we just choose to do what we think is best anyway. So you mentioned Saul, and that's what we find with him and his example. So anything else in chapter 12 before we look at 13 tonight? Will?
Just real quick, we talked about how his first mistake was that he went to Egypt in the first place, and it just kind of struck me. It seems like sometimes it's a lot easier to trust in God's long-term or far-away promises. You know, he promised Abraham, give you, the seed promise, the land promise, the nation promise. We trusted all that. Even for us today, he's promised us salvation and forgiveness of sin, and we'll believe all that. But when it comes to our immediate needs, sometimes we're not as apt to believe it, and we think, oh, well, I have to take matters into my own hands. I have to do this, and then we
Right.
make a mistake. And it seems like that's what Abram did.
No, I think that's a good point. The immediacy of problems, sometimes we think, oh, well, I've got to deal with that. God's got the bigger things down the road, but I'll take care of these things here. No, I think that's a good point. So let's read chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So, what's interesting about the way Abram and Lot decide to separate?
They prioritize their stuff over their family.
Okay? So
Possessions were more important.
So there's strife between their herdsmen, and that's potentially going to cause friction between them. And so,
Well, and they were outgrazing the land that they were able to occupy together.
right.
Right? They couldn't sustain what they both had in the same place. So their possessions forced them to separate.
Okay, their possessions,
That ended up, at least for Lot.
yeah, they force them apart. And when Lot is offered the opportunity to decide where he wants to live, that again is not the normal way that would have happened. Since Abram would have been considered like the head of the clan, he was the one who typically would have been expected to say, "I'm going to live here and you go live over there." But we see Abram give Lot the choice. So why might he decide to do that? I think that's part of it. He's putting faith in God that, I don't have to choose this because God's already told me that I'm going to get this land one day, so I'll let you go live where you want to live and I'll just live the other place. We also see humility in this, that he is letting his nephew make this decision. He's not forcing it upon him. But the problem is, the way Lot approaches this, like a good businessman who's got cattle to raise, and part of the problem is, well, there's not enough pasture for all of our animals, so where does he want to take his flocks? To the best pasture land. And so he looks to the east, to where the Jordan River Valley was, and he goes that direction. Because it was, as we're told in the text, at that time it was so well watered, it was as like the garden of the Lord, like the Garden of Eden, and how lush and fertile it was before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that again tells us another thing is, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that part of the world got changed from being this very lush and green area to being more like what we see today in that part of the world. And we're already kind of clued into why that's going to happen. Because what are we told about those men in the city of Sodom? Exceedingly wicked and sinners before the Lord. So one of the other things that is happening here, Moses, as he's writing this, he's cluing us into an idea, this concept of sin, based on the movement of people. So when Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden, which direction were they driven out? To the east. When Cain fled the presence of the Lord, which direction did he go? East. When the family of Noah refused to scatter, what direction were they traveling as a family? East. And so while it's not saying that if you move east, you're going to be in sin, no matter where you live. The indication, the idea is that when people moved in an eastward direction, there's ending up in places that are sinful or doing sinful things. And here, just like with what happened with the Tower of Babel, when they went to the eastern land and they started building a city, God came down and he had to scatter the people because of their sin. Well, here, Lot moves eastward towards cities that we're told were more wicked than any of the others around them, that the people were exceedingly wicked and sinners. And then at the same time, you have Abraham, and so he goes the opposite direction, just like he had told his nephew he would do. But the Lord speaks to him, and he reiterates the promise to Abraham. And this is another reason why, when you think about how long it took for the promises to become reality for him, that 25-year period, it's not that God was constantly showing up every day and saying, by the way, remember those promises I gave you, but he does show up every so often throughout those years, telling Abraham, these promises are real, they're going to be fulfilled. And this is one of those instances. He's just gotten back to the land, he's been living in it, but he's again kind of run into friction. You know, he and his nephew were having trouble being provided for, and now maybe this part of the land that I once thought was going to be mine, now that's my nephew's land. Could be maybe what Abraham's thinking. But in reality, God tells him, look around. Look to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. All of the land you see, that's your descendants' land. And that would include the direction Lot had just gone. And so just because he and Lot have separated, God says, this is all still yours. This is what I've promised to your descendants. And so because of that, God gives him another command. If you look at verse 17, what does God tell him to do? Right, walk through the land. Arise and walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. So he tells Abraham, in essence, to become a nomad in the land and travel around in it and see what the land is that God has promised to him. And so Abram does travel through the land again, and he goes back to the oaks of Mamre near Hebron, and there he builds another altar to the Lord. And this was something I hadn't thought about before, but there are 4 different altars, we're told, that Abram builds throughout his life. There's the altar at Bethel, there's one at Hebron, there's one by the oaks of Mamre, and there's one on Mount Moriah when he is told to offer Isaac on that mountain. And so Abram shows this faithful example of making an emphasis on worshiping the Lord, especially in the places he's living. So we see here, he's come to this place to live, and so he builds an altar because he is one of those who calls on the name of the Lord. Like we saw in chapter 5, how it's the descendants of Seth who started calling on the name of the Lord, started worshiping him because he is God, and Abram is connected to that for the people. He is one of those who does that in that line. So, next week, we will, Lord willing, continue. We're going to look at chapters 14 through 16, if you'll read over those before the next class.